We are blessed today to have Don Alsup with Shelby Systems here in the studio. Don, welcome to Ministry in the Marketplace.
Thank you, Richard. It's interesting coming over here. You're actually in the same building where I used to work, so it's a small world.
It is. First of all, could you share with our audience a little about your background?
Sure, I'd be glad to. You know, I was very, very fortunate growing up to be in a strong Christian family. My father was the chairman of the deacons. He was the principal of a Christian school where I attended. My mother was a Sunday school teacher. She was the vice principal of a Christian school here in the Memphis area. And from a very early age, they taught me about the Bible and explained the plan of salvation to me. And I remember when I was 8 years old, they told me, Don, it's time for you to start thinking about a relationship with Jesus Christ. I remember a guest pastor came to our church, Southern Avenue Baptist Church, and he spoke. And when he offered the invitation at the end, I went forward and said, I want to become a Christian. I got baptized and went on from there. And, you know, I was a pretty good kid growing up. I tried to do the things that I was supposed to do and not get into much trouble. My parents made sure I was in church pretty much every time the doors were open. But the thing, I guess, that bothered me a little bit is I wasn't really involved in evangelism, wasn't reading my Bible very much, wasn't praying regularly. It just kind of seemed more like a tradition to me than a relationship with Jesus Christ. And then when I got in college, I went to a Christian concert. Russ Taff, I don't know if you know him or not, but he said something during that concert that changed my life. He said, you can't live off your parents' faith. That hit me right between the eyes. I re-examined my faith at that point. Amen. I had one of those red letter edition Bibles. I went through and read all the words of Jesus through the whole entire New Testament. And I prayed, God, if you're there, make yourself known to me. Make yourself real. And it became real. I felt like I was there as I read through the words of Jesus. And I really did desire a relationship with Jesus Christ at that point in my life. And since that day, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life and done a lot of things that aren't right. But I've never doubted my salvation and my commitment to Jesus Christ since that day.
Well, can we talk a little about your broadcasting experience and how God's led you to where you are today?
Sure. You know, my favorite Christmas gift was in the 7th grade. I got an AM radio, and I loved playing with that thing, going up and down the dial. At night, especially when the stations back then, they would go further. And I would try and pick up stations from Chicago and Nashville and Atlanta and listen to some of the exciting things that were going on back then. And, you know, Memphis was a great city to grow up in if you wanted to work in radio, because we had Rick Dees in the morning who went on to become famous, and Ron Jordan and people like that. And I loved music. And it sounded like those guys were having so much fun. I said, that's what I want to do when I grow up. So in high school, I participated in plays and public speaking. When I got to college, I majored in radio, TV, and film, and actually got a show on the local Memphis State campus radio station, WSMS, The Spirit of Memphis State. After I worked there for a few months, I thought maybe I might be good enough to get on at a local small radio station. My mom told me, you know, I heard on this radio station that said they have an opening for an on-air shift. So I went by there and talked to them, and I wasn't very good, but I had a lot of energy and I had a good attitude, so they actually put me on in the afternoon shift. The equipment there was like from the 1940s. I mean, it was an old board and an old transmitter. I think it was like a 10,000-watt transmitter. And got a chance to work for WHBQ, which was the first station in Memphis, first station in America to play an Elvis record. I changed radio stations a lot, and that was because every couple of years they would change format and people would move out and they'd bring new people in. You know, I was wondering, what's going on here? Am I ever going to be able to get a job where it's steady and keeps going? And I was wondering, was this something I should be in, or should I be looking for something else? But you know what? As I look back at that, and what I'm doing now, that was the perfect training ground for what I do today.
Well, what is Shelby Systems' primary goal?
Shelby's official mission statement is, Shelby Systems exists to supply the software and services needed to help ministries and organizations around the world thrive. We're providing the best and most efficient software for things like financials and membership and contributions and attendance, so that the church staff has more time to do real ministry work, like sharing the gospel and serving the community and helping the least of these, like the Bible says. But the good news is that's just the main goal. Ministry Brands, which is Shelby's parent company, they're doing ministry work in El Salvador. Shelby Cares, which is a group inside Shelby Systems, has been supporting Orange Mound Outreach Ministries for a number of years. So Shelby is not just about making money or writing software. It's about ministering, like I said, nationally, locally, and to our customers.
Well, let's talk about the impact that you've seen God make on churches or nonprofits through Shelby System. There's webinars, there's podcasts. It's a new time, a new generation, for communicating the gospel. Could you share with our audience a little about that?
Shelby Systems has been blessed by God for 40 years, and we want to return some of those blessings back to the world. We do a monthly video podcast, and I've been honored and privileged to write that and produce it and host it. Shelby doesn't make a penny from that podcast. That's something we do for our customers, for inspiration and for ministry. We've interviewed national guests like Coach Bobby Bowden, the Kendrick brothers who did the War Room movie, Big Daddy Weave, organizations like the Salvation Army, and Dave Ramsey. And one of the things I've learned from doing that podcast is that, sometimes when you watch the news, it seems like a dark and evil world. Everything's falling apart. We're going in the wrong direction morally. But doing that podcast and talking to these people, there is a lot of godly things going on in the world. It's just not getting noticed. And that was my main goal in starting that podcast, is to start focusing on positive things that Christians can be proud of. You look at it and it's an example that somebody's setting, and it's encouraging other people to go out and get involved in things like this.
So it sounds like what you're saying, Shelby System and your team, y'all are in the kingdom business.
Absolutely.
And what you see in your venue as a commercial provider in your space, it's an opportunity to advance the gospel in many different ways.
Yeah, and a matter of fact, when you said that, that reminded me that right now, Ministry Brands, who is the parent company for several Christian software companies, they've bought them up and they're trying to get them to work together instead of competing against each other. They're having a contest between the Ministry Brands companies to see who can raise the most money and be the most creative in helping local and national organizations. And then the winner is going to have a barista come into the company and serve coffee to them for that day.
Well, Don, as we begin to close this conversation, how can you encourage someone who's listening today within their space? They're not in the software business or any kind of media communication venue, but God has them somewhere else. How would you encourage them today in serving the Lord?
I think sharing your faith maybe is probably right up there with public speaking as something that you're afraid of, but I would say that fear is greatly exaggerated. I've got a really great story I'd like to share with you how I got involved in missions. A couple of years ago, went to see the Super Bowl at my church, and when I got home, my wife said, "I've got a really bad headache." So she went to bed. She woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning and said, "Don, it hurts so bad I can't stand it anymore." So we went down to the minor emergency clinic, and they were closed, fortunately. And we went to the emergency room, and the doctor said, "We're going to do a CAT scan." And my wife said, "No, you don't need to do that. I had one done a month or two ago." He goes, "We're going to do it anyway." If you could have seen the look on that doctor's face when he came in there, he said, "Thank God we did that CAT scan. Your wife has 3 brain aneurysms." He said, "A third of the people that have this don't make it to the hospital. A third don't make it to the operating table. And most of the rest of them don't ever make a full recovery." So that was a bad day. She had the operation that day, and she stayed in the ICU for a month. And there were some bad times to where she didn't know who I was, and I just had this confidence that things were going to turn out okay. And she finally got to go home. It's extremely rare, but she made a complete full recovery. I told you that story to say this. When that was going on, I promised God if he would heal my wife, I would do something that I had never done before. And that's when I went on my first mission trip. And we went to South Dakota. 90% of that area is unchurched. I got to share the gospel several times. And what I found out when I was there was almost every single one of those people was extremely open to hear the gospel. Matter of fact, the very first person I talked to received Christ as his Savior. And the other ones were just riveted because they'd never heard the story before. So anyway, I just wanted to share that story to encourage people. It's not really that hard to share the gospel. Don't be scared to share your faith. That's part of your story and your life, and you can make a difference in the workplace.
Don, can you share with our audience how people can find out more about you?
Sure. Our podcast webpage is shelbysystems.com/podcast.
Well, Don, God bless you in your ministry work at Shelby Systems, and thanks for coming on the program today.
Well, it was an honor. I really enjoyed talking to you.